One of Hollywood's most controversial legends, yet also one of its most perfect, almost untouchable golden age icons. Behind the glamour, there are whispers of truths too dangerous to reveal. A secret tape recording, a confession never to be heard. Not of awards, but of forbidden desires, secret letters, and affairs that led to betrayal, scandal, and if so, what is in it? On screen, Paul Newman was untouchable. In Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, he burned with intensity. In The Hustler, he was sharp and dangerous. And in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, he wasn't just another star. He was a legend. Off-screen, he seemed even greater. A 50-year marriage to Joanne Woodward, the love story Hollywood called unbreakable. A philanthropist who gave away hundreds of millions. A man who could race cars at 180 miles an hour on Sunday, then spend Monday reading bedtime stories to his kids. To the world, Paul Newman was perfection. The rare man who stood above Hollywood's scandals, untouched by its sins. But in Hollywood, perfection is the most dangerous illusion of all. And behind Newman's flawless image, the whispers told a different story. Not of drugs or drunken brawls, but of secret letters, strange disappearances, and desires too dangerous to ever be revealed. In his final days, it said Newman left behind not a will, not stories of his glory years, but a confession. A confession about a secret list he could never share while alive. So who were the names, and why did he guard them in silence until the very end? Tonight, we begin with the first name on that hidden list. Marlon Brando, a love story drowning in lust and suffering. They first crossed paths in 1961 at a glittering gala at the Beverly Hilton. The chandeliers sparkled, the press swarmed, and Hollywood's finest paraded through the doors. Newman arrived with his wife Joanne Woodward, polished and perfect as always. Brando arrived late, shirt wrinkled, collar open, eyes that flickered between playful and cold. He didn't just notice Newman. He hovered behind him like a shadow, studying every move. At one point, Brando leaned close and murmured, "I thought you'd be as boring as the papers make you. Turns out you're the only one here who isn't pretending." For a man like Paul Newman, disciplined, careful, allergic to flattery, those words landed like a crack in the armor. For once, he didn't push them away. He let them in. Soon, their paths began to cross in ways that weren't so public. Coffee, in quiet Westwood cafes where the waiters pretended not to notice. Nights wandering around Silver Lake, where their reflections moved together across the water. Sudden trips to Palm Springs, slipping into rented villas where the curtains never opened. For Newman, it felt like love. Raw, undeniable, impossible to resist. For Brando, it was something else entirely. Because Brando never loved the way others did. He couldn't. To him, even desire was another role to play. He pulled Newman into rooms full of strangers, producers, journalists, men with vague promises of films, awards, power. At first, Newman thought they were just parties. But slowly, he realized the truth. He wasn't a partner. He was a prop. A supporting character in Brando's endless performance for attention. And then came the betrayal. Newman's letters, handwritten, tender, heartbreakingly vulnerable, somehow ended up in the hands of gossip reporters. An anonymous column soon appeared, Love Behind the Lens. It spoke of a blue-eyed family man, torn between a picture-perfect marriage and a forbidden affair with a dark-haired icon. No names were mentioned, but everyone in Hollywood knew who it pointed to. Some whispered that Brando himself had delivered those letters, slipping them into a newsroom just to stir the pot. Others claimed Newman's words were read aloud at smoky, late-night gatherings in Laurel Canyon, passed around like a script for Brando's amusement. Because Brando needed scandal the way other men need air. He needed his name in print, his face in the headlines, his legend kept alive by fire, even if someone else burned to ash. And that someone was Newman. At home, Joanne found one of those letters tucked inside a book. She didn't scream. She didn't leave. She quietly wrote her husband a note. "If you need refuge, I'm here. But if you need another lie, I can't help you." Newman kept it folded away for years, a reminder of the cost of silence. That winter in Connecticut was brutal. Neighbors remembered he rarely left the house. His daughter Nell recalled waking in the night to see him pacing the porch in the freezing dark, cigarette glowing faintly in the wind. He never explained. No one asked. Everyone knew. The whispers didn't stop. They grew darker. Rumors of midnight phone calls from Brando, left unanswered. Envelopes slipped under Newman's door with photographs too grainy to prove, too suggestive to ignore. Some swore they had seen pictures of the two together, though those images seemed to vanish before anyone could prove they were real. Whether destroyed by Brando himself or buried by studio power, no one could say. Newman, in his silence, carried the weight alone. In a tape said to have been recorded in his final days, his voice trembled. "I thought if I loved him long enough, he would change. But he didn't. He turned every feeling into a tool, and I let him turn me into one too. I loved him in a way no one should love anyone." Their story never exploded in scandal. It didn't end in a fight or a public breakup. It ended in silence. Newman stopped answering calls, stopped writing letters, stopped believing love could change a man who never wanted to be changed. But silence doesn't erase pain. For years, Newman carried the scar of that affair, because some wounds don't heal. They only hide. And Marlon Brando, the most magnetic, most dangerous man in Hollywood, was only the beginning. The second name on Newman's hidden list? Steve McQueen. If Brando was a storm of seduction and betrayal, McQueen was fire, relentless, consuming, and impossible to control. A fire that lit up everything around it and burned anyone who got too close. Newman once described him with just 2 words: that bastard. Words spit out not casually, but like the release of decades of rage. Because McQueen wasn't just another secret. He was a scar Newman carried for life. Some say it began in the shadows of an award night where Newman was the polished family man and McQueen was still raw and hungry. That night, his stare was impossible to ignore. Defiant, almost possessive. The kind of stare that told Newman his life would never be the same. What started as fleeting encounters soon turned into something far more dangerous. Hours stolen in dim hotel rooms, staff whispering about the blue-eyed star who slipped in after midnight and left before dawn. Rumors of shouting matches that ended in eerie silence, broken only by glass shattering against the walls. Neighbors spoke of doors slamming, of voices rising, of a presence in the hallways that sent chills long after they'd gone. To Newman, it was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. To McQueen, it was never love, it was possession. He didn't just want Newman close, he wanted to own him, to prove that even Hollywood's golden husband could be bent, broken, and claimed. Soon the whispers reached the press. Hints of McQueen's unusual friendships surfaced in gossip columns. Almost overnight, he staged public appearances with glamorous women, flashing smiles that dared anyone to question him. Behind closed doors, Newman found himself cornered. A legal document slid across the table. A whisper in his ear: "You have a wife, a daughter. Don't destroy them just because you're too weak." It wasn't only intimidation, it was control. Entire stories disappeared before they could be printed. Reporters silenced. Editors suddenly changing their tune. Some even claimed McQueen had a network of allies in studios and tabloids, people willing to erase anything for a price. And when he wanted to twist the knife, he did it in public. In one interview, asked about a man who had once been obsessed with him, McQueen smirked. "I don't remember his name. Probably an overzealous fan, the creepy kind who sends letters and knocks on your door in the middle of the night." Newman heard it, and he understood. McQueen hadn't just denied him, he had turned their intimacy into a punchline. Their rivalry between them spilled onto film sets, To the world, it looked like two stars battling for attention. But behind the curtain, the tension was personal, raw, and merciless. Newman once confronted him, his voice cracking with rage. "Why did you make me look like a lunatic to the whole world?" McQueen only smiled, opened a drawer, and tossed out a cassette tape, just in case. Whispers claim he kept dozens of those tapes. Every confession, every fight, every weakness Newman had ever revealed, locked away like ammunition. Some even said he kept them in a locked box under his bed, a private arsenal no one dared touch. And then there was the gift. A box left at McQueen's doorstep. Inside, a torn shirt from a night blurred by whiskey and violence. The fabric stained, the scent of liquor still clinging to it, with faint lipstick marks pressed into the collar. Some who heard the story swore the shirt wasn't the only thing in the box, that there was also a single Polaroid, its image too damaged to make out clearly, but unsettling enough to leave McQueen shaken. It wasn't a keepsake, it was a warning. In a tape said to have been recorded during his final days, Newman confessed, "He used love like a knife. Every embrace was a cut. And still I went back. I still loved him, even knowing he'd be the one to kill me if I let him closer." There was no clean break, no farewell, no closure. Newman withdrew into silence, while McQueen paraded a picture-perfect life before the cameras. But silence doesn't erase fire. It only leaves behind smoke, ashes, and scars. And as Newman staggered from that blaze, another figure appeared on the horizon, softer, warmer, but no less dangerous to his heart. Hollywood adored them. On screen, they were the perfect match. Two outlaws riding into legend, their partnership so effortless it felt like fate. Newman, the cunning charmer with the piercing blue eyes. Redford, the cool rebel with danger in his smile. The world saw brotherhood, brilliance, the kind of chemistry no studio could ever manufacture. But whispers said the cameras only caught half the story, because when the crew packed up for the day, when the lights shut off and the canyons fell silent, something else flickered between them. Something unscripted, something forbidden. A lighting technician once claimed he walked past Redford's motel balcony late one night and saw Newman standing there, cigarette in hand, eyes rimmed red, like he was waiting. Moments later, Redford opened the door, pulled him inside, and they disappeared into the dark. The technician said he never spoke of it again, but he never forgot it either. Others on set noticed smaller things. How Newman would linger at the end of a scene, his hand brushing Redford's shoulder just a second too long. How Redford's eyes followed Newman when he thought no one was watching. How the two of them slipped away on weekends with excuses that never quite added up. A driver once recalled being told to drop them at opposite ends of a canyon trail, only to see them return together at sunrise, silent but inseparable. To Newman, it was more than attraction, it was love. Fragile, dangerous, impossible, but real. In a tape whispered to exist, he admitted, "We both had families, reputations, lives built for the public. But when it was just us, I loved him in a way that didn't fit anywhere else. I waited for the day he would love me in the light as he did in the shadows. That day never came. Because Redford was careful, always careful. To the press, he was golden, the family man, the all-American hero. And when whispers of their closeness began leaking out, he made his choice. Silence, protection, distance." Some journalists claimed Newman had once prepared to tell the truth. But just before the words could be spoken, stories began to surface. Vicious stories painting him as unstable, erratic, even dangerous. No names were printed, but the implications were clear. His career stalled, invitations slowed, and through it all, Redford never spoke a word in his defense. There were darker whispers, too, of anonymous faxes sent to editors, of phone calls in the night warning them off Newman's side of the story. Nothing provable, nothing traceable, but enough to ensure silence. Newman's own journal, fragments that have been described but never shown, held one line that cut deeper than any rumor. "The man who called me light now uses me as shadow." The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold. Redford didn't just deny Newman, he erased him. And yet, the silence between them spoke louder than any scandal could. At award shows, when asked about Newman, Redford would smile politely, change the subject, and walk away. That smile, that silence, broke Newman more than any headline. One crew member from their later collaborations once said he caught Newman staring at Redford across a crowded room, as if willing him to acknowledge what they both knew. Redford glanced back, then turned away, leaving Newman frozen in the kind of pain only two people can understand. Their story didn't end with a breakup, or even a fight. It ended with deliberate distance. A silence that stretched on for decades. A silence Newman carried to his grave. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't come with knives or shouting matches. Sometimes betrayal comes with a smile on stage, a handshake for the cameras, and a silence that leaves the other person bleeding inside. And though the world celebrated their partnership, what lived behind the curtain was a secret that broke Newman in ways no audience would ever see. But Redford wasn't the last name. The silence he left behind was soon filled by someone younger, wilder, a rebel whose star burned so brightly it could never last. A young, rebellious soul, burning, untamed, gone far too soon. Have you guessed? James Dean. Not the loudest scandal in Newman's life, but the one that cut the deepest. The love that began with admiration grew into something undeniable and ended in a heartbreak that haunted him to the grave. They met in the shadows of Hollywood's golden machine, two men painted as rivals but drawn together like magnets. On set, people joked they looked like two versions of the same star. Newman was steady, polished, with a wife and a carefully built life. Dean was younger, raw, reckless, a flame that dared the world to watch him burn. When he first locked eyes with Newman, it wasn't rivalry, it was recognition. Something in that gaze followed Newman home at night, refusing to let him sleep. They slipped into each other's worlds quietly. A corner booth in a diner at midnight, jukebox humming low. Drives down forgotten highways in Dean's silver Porsche, headlights slicing through the dark. Hidden afternoons in borrowed cabins, where they rehearsed lines no one would ever hear. Lines that turned into confessions whispered between breaths. Dean once told Newman after a storm-soaked premiere, "I don't need anyone to understand me. I just need you not to pretend." Newman didn't reply. He only pressed Dean's hand against his chest, where his heartbeat betrayed everything he couldn't say. But Hollywood's beauty never lasted long. One night, a crew member swore he saw them through a fogged car window, their faces pressed too close to be just friends. A photograph was rumored to exist, but it vanished before any paper could print it. Still, whispers ran through every studio hallway. A blind item appeared, two silver screen rebels sharing more than a script. No names, but everyone knew. And in Hollywood, knowing was enough to destroy. Suddenly, calls stopped coming. Invitations dried up. Then came the threats, subtle but chilling. Newman found an unmarked envelope beneath his door. Inside, a matchbook from a Sunset Boulevard bar with a line scrawled inside the flap. "Careful. Stars burn out fastest in the dark." Others tell of a late-night call, Newman alone in his kitchen. A raspy voice said, "If you want to live, forget him." The glass in his hand slipped, shattering across the floor. Dean unraveled. His calls to Newman grew desperate. His nights longer, his silences darker. Newman once drove across town at 3 a.m., pounding on Dean's door until his knuckles bled. No answer. Only a scrap of paper slid under the crack. "If loving you is wrong, then I don't deserve to live." Days later, Dean collapsed. The press softened it as exhaustion. Another Hollywood breakdown. Newman knew better. He carried the guilt like a second skin. The push and pull tore them apart. Dean begged for truth. Newman clung to silence, family, reputation, the unbreakable cage around his life. Then came the final plea. Mexico, Friday. If you don't come, I'll understand. Newman bought the ticket. He even drove to the airport. But fear was heavier than love. He turned back, and then it was too late. The wreck of the Porsche was hauled to a garage, a twisted coffin of steel and glass. Some whispered Newman went there in secret, begging to see it. The mechanic refused, but slipped him a shard of the rearview mirror. Blood-specked, cracked, impossible to forget. 24 years old, gone in an instant. Radios across America broke the news. Newman sat frozen, staring at his hands. Later, in a recording said to be made near his own death, he whispered, "They weren't shaking, not a tear, only one question. Why didn't I get on that plane? If I had gone, would he still be alive?" He never spoke Dean's name again. But friends swore that on lonely nights, when the whiskey glass was empty, he would look at the ceiling and whisper, "I'm sorry. You should have lived a brilliant life." And tucked away in his bedside drawer, until the very end, was a single keepsake, a faded silver handkerchief. No one knew how he got it, but everyone knew who it belonged to. The next name was not a superstar, not a legend on billboards, not the kind of man who could dominate a room like Brando or McQueen. He was someone Hollywood tried to forget, someone who reminded Newman of everything fragile, everything real. Sal Mineo. By the mid-70s, Newman looked like perfection to the world. Still polite, still magnetic, still the man America trusted as its model husband. But inside, he was wrecked. Brando had scarred him. McQueen had burned him. Redford had betrayed him. Dean's ghost still haunted him. Newman walked through life like a man wearing an immaculate mask, while underneath, he was crumbling. And that's when Sal appeared. Not in a glamorous setting, not at a studio party, but in a therapist's office in West Hollywood on a rain-soaked afternoon. Joanne, always patient, had gently pushed Paul toward counseling, hoping he might find a way to breathe again. And there, across the waiting room, was Mineo. Hollywood had once called him the next James Dean, but the machine that built him had also broken him. Too soft, too open, too unwilling to fake what others demanded. The studios turned away. Whispers about his desires became rumors, then chains. Roles dried up, invitations stopped coming. He was branded a liability. They spoke quietly at first, not as lovers, not even as friends. Just two men who recognized the same exhaustion in each other's eyes. After therapy sessions, they'd wander down side streets in the drizzle, coats pulled tight, saying little. It wasn't words they needed, it was silence, and the rare comfort of someone who understood. "Are you sick too?" Newman asked one evening as they paused under a flickering neon sign. Mineo smiled faintly, touched his temple, and whispered, "Not sick, just trying to unlearn what the world told me was a disease." From then, something gentle began to grow. No wild affairs, no scandals, just moments. A note slipped into Newman's pocket. "If they call you broken, then let me be broken with you." Newman carried it in his wallet like a secret prayer. Another time, Mineo left a cassette on Paul's doorstep, nothing more than a single piano melody he had recorded at home. Newman would play it alone at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed. There were plans too, a trip to Venice. A script Mineo had drafted about two men in a drowning city, clinging to each other as the waters rose. For the first time in years, Newman allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life, a quiet one, without cameras, without lies. But Hollywood doesn't let men like Sal Mineo dream for long. One February night after leaving a rehearsal, Mineo never made it inside his apartment. A shadow moved in the alley. A knife flashed once, twice. The police filed it as a robbery. The papers called it tragedy. But among friends, the whispers never stopped. They said it wasn't random. They said it was punishment, a warning to anyone who dared to live too openly. When Newman heard, he locked himself away. Friends said he disappeared to the rooftop for nights on end, chain-smoking under the stars, staring at the city as though waiting for Sal to walk out of the dark. He never mentioned the name aloud again. But Joanne once found a handkerchief folded in his drawer, stitched with Sal's initials. On the tape, his voice broke. I thought I was saving him, but it was Sal who saved me. He showed me that love didn't have to be loud or cruel or hidden. He only asked me to be myself, and I never got to thank him. The next shadow in Newman's hidden life was Montgomery Clift. Newman once said, in a voice that trembled like it carried a lifetime, I thought nothing could break me, until Monty. Their connection wasn't built on scandal or fury, but on wounds. They found each other in the cracks, two men who looked perfect under the lights but were quietly falling apart in the dark. Their bond grew not from passion alone, but from pain. Letters passed between them, scrawled in blue ink, words shaking across the page as though they weighed 100 pounds each. Half confession, half plea. Monty once wrote, I don't need you to choose me. I just need you not to pretend I don't exist. They weren't love letters. They were survival notes. Fragments of truth too fragile for Hollywood to ever see. And then one of those letters vanished. Some claimed it was stolen by an assistant desperate to climb. Others whispered it was deliberately planted, a knife slipped between Newman's ribs by someone who wanted him exposed. Within weeks, the gossip columns began circling like vultures. Headlines danced around the truth, never naming names, but sharp enough to wound. For the first time, the golden husband of America looked human, vulnerable. Joanne didn't need the papers. She discovered the truth at home. One night, she found an opened envelope slipped beneath her pillow. Monty's words stared back at her. She didn't confront Paul. She left only one line. If you choose lies, don't ask me to live inside them. Then came the silence. Newman unraveled. Not because Hollywood whispered, but because the two lives he tried to hold together were both breaking. The wife who trusted him, and the man who begged him not to hide. Friends whispered that he vanished for days, checking into hotels under false names, retreating to cabins with curtains drawn. A housekeeper once claimed she saw him burning letters in the fireplace, watching the ashes fall until dawn. Doctors appeared quietly at back doors, prescriptions slipped into unmarked bottles. Newman never explained. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. Monty, meanwhile, spiraled. Alone in New York, drowning in pills and isolation, his body carried the weight of every wound, every secret. One night the phone rang. Newman answered. On the other end, Monty's voice cracked. I can't be your shadow anymore. I can't live this way. Newman begged, pleaded. He promised the unthinkable, that he would stop hiding, stop lying, go public no matter the cost. There was a pause, and then silence. The line went dead. Weeks later, whispers spread. Monty had been found unconscious. An ambulance in the night, a hospital bed. He lived, but he never spoke to Newman again. To Paul, it was worse than death. It was exile, erasure. Years passed. Newman carried on, smiling for cameras, racing cars, playing roles the world adored. But inside, he bled quietly. When the call finally came, Monty was dead, alone in his house, his heart and body worn down. Newman shattered. Some said he screamed, hurling glass against the wall until it broke. Others swore he didn't move at all, just sat frozen, staring at his hands. One rumor claimed he kept a single item of Monty's, hidden in his desk. A lighter engraved with initials no one ever dared to ask about. Another whispered that on certain nights after too much whiskey, Newman would drive aimlessly for hours, ending up outside cemeteries, headlights burning into the dark. What is certain is what Newman later confessed on tape. I thought I was strong, but I was a coward. I only knew how to love in silence. And the tape didn't end with closure. It ended the way their story did, with silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Maybe that silence, heavier than betrayal, heavier than scandal, was the cruelest secret Newman ever carried. 6 names, 6 secrets, 6 shadows Paul Newman carried to his grave. Some were storms of betrayal, some were fires of obsession. Some were tender sorrows too fragile to exist in daylight. And together, they formed a story Hollywood could never print. A story written on film reels, but on the hidden pages of a man's life. To the world, Newman was flawless, the perfect husband, the untouchable star. But behind the mask of Hollywood's golden boy was a truth as old as time. Even legends are human. They bleed, they break. They long for things they can never have. And in Newman's time, longing like his was not just forbidden, it was dangerous. The golden age of Hollywood was built on illusion, a factory of dreams where studios controlled not just contracts and careers, but lives. Spotlights blinded as much as they lit. Smiles were rehearsed as carefully as lines. Magazines printed stories sculpted by publicists. And behind it all, there was one unspoken rule. Men could not love men. Not if they wanted to keep their fame, their families, or their futures. That is what makes these whispers so haunting. They are not simply rumors about one actor's secret life. They are reflections of an entire generation forced to live in silence. Men who shared glances instead of confessions, letters instead of promises, love stories that could only exist in the margins, erased before they could ever be read aloud. For Newman, the cost of silence was immense. To audiences, he gave performances of brilliance, honesty, and depth. But off-screen, he carried a weight he could never share. Imagine the agony of being celebrated as America's perfect husband, while your heart beat to rhythms you could not admit. Imagine writing love letters you could never send, sharing embraces you could never acknowledge, mourning losses you could never name. This was the reality for countless stars of his era. Newman was not alone. Behind the polished images of Hollywood's golden age were countless stories just like his. Stories of survival, of hiding, of building perfect facades while shadows grew darker beneath. And maybe that is why his hidden confessions, whether real or legend, endure today. Because they remind us that even in a world built on perfection, it is imperfection that makes us human. Even in the brightest light, there are shadows. And even in the silence of fear, love still tried to find its way. Perhaps Newman's greatest legacy is not only in the roles he played, or the millions he gave to charity, or the life he built in the public eye. Perhaps it is also in these whispers, a reminder that those we idolize are no different from us. They fight battles no one sees. They ache for acceptance. They dream of a freedom they may never taste. And maybe, just maybe, his hidden story is not just about him. It is Hollywood's story. A reminder that even in its most glamorous years, the dream factory was full of silence, fear, and hearts locked behind closed doors. Almost forgotten, almost erased. But not entirely, because tonight, decades later, we've spoken them aloud. Not as stone-cold fact, but as echoes. Echoes of love, betrayal, longing, and survival. And if there is one truth buried in these echoes, it is this: perfection is an illusion. What truly endures are the struggles we hide, the courage it takes to keep living, and the secrets that, once revealed, show us the humanity behind the legend. Paul Newman's films will live forever. His charities will continue to change lives. But his secret list, whether myth or memory, carries another kind of legacy. A reminder that even icons have shadows. And sometimes, it is the shadows that make the light unforgettable. Behind the smile of a legend lay a truth Hollywood never dared to show. Was Newman's hidden confession fact or myth? The answer may never be clear. But one thing is certain: the shadows of Hollywood are darker than we imagine. Like, share, and subscribe, because the next name on the list is coming.